Now let's get to our first question for the day, which comes to us from Oroville, California. The listener writes, "Can you please discuss humanism and the separation of church and state?"
In the separation of church and state, I think it's been greatly misunderstood that a Christian's not to participate in politics. And very candidly, it's so corrupt today in Washington that, very frankly, I don't see how a great many men can participate in it. As one man who is involved in it, he says, "I just hold my nose and keep going." Well, I guess that's the way. But I believe Christians ought to participate in politics, and the separation of church and state has nothing in the world to do with it. The thing that our founding fathers had in mind was one thing and one thing only. They left a country that had a state church, and they did not want this new government to establish a state church. Now, that hasn't anything to do with having prayer in schools. You can have prayer in school without starting a state church. And a preacher has a perfect right to talk on abortion because the Scripture calls it murder, and therefore it's quite clear that today they're using this idea of separation of church and state as a sledgehammer to hit some of the preachers over the head. And I think it's wrong, entirely wrong, and it's to misunderstand what it is. Now, you mentioned this question of humanism. Humanism has so saturated our entire school system, our entire educational system, and it is in every nook and cranny of this nation today. And it is without doubt the deadliest of all the isms. It's worse than communism. It's worse than any of the cults. And that is this awful thing of humanism exalting man and dethroning God. That's what Adam and Eve did in the Garden of Eden. They wanted to become as gods. And that's exactly what a great many human beings want to become, as God, and they don't want another God competing with them. Therefore, they rule out God and introduce humanism and exalt mankind. And you find people running after every Tom, Dick, and Harry today. And all of these, may I say to you, are merely the results of humanism. This idea of having idols today, athletic idols, movie star idols, TV idols, and even preachers are in on it today. But as Dr. Lehman Strauss said some time ago, and I think his finest statement made, he said, speaking to several of us preachers, he says, "We are not celebrities, we are servants of God." And believe me, preachers need to keep that in mind today, because even some of the men that are talking against humanism are filled with pride, exalting themselves, and that sort of thing, may I say to you, is very contradictory.